This is Up Close, SABC News weekday program that profiles men and women making waves in their industries, African icons, rising stars, idols, and veterans. If they're in their news, then you can catch their story right here. I'm Tsepa Motsekua. Stay tuned with us for the next half hour as we talk to an iconic African journalist, Professor Anton Harber. Anton Harber is the founding editor of the Mail and Guardian newspaper, previously known as the Weekly Mail. Before then, he had also worked as sub-editor of the Sunday Post and Sowetan newspapers and as political reporter for the Rand Daily Mail. When South Africa became a democracy, he moved on to hold corporate and board positions such as CEO of Kagiso Broadcasting and chair of the National Association of Broadcasters. Now running the journalism department of Wits University, is there any fire left in the 80s champion of alternative journalism? Well, that's why we've got Up Close to find out about that. Hi, Professor, how are you?
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
I'm very nervous to have you there because you're my professor at school. I thought, no, I'm not doing this one. But I was told, go for it.
Well, this time you've got me in the hot seat.
Yes. Professor, who would you say Anton Harber is? I mean, we have an image of who you are, because we think we know you as a public person. But who would you say Anton Harber really is?
If you ask me my core identity, it would be as a journalist. From a young age, I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I was fascinated by politics, and I loved reading and writing. And those things came together in journalism. So the thing that's really defined the way things have been framed for me is that my heart and soul are in journalism.
Where did you grow up, Professor?
I grew up in Durban.
Okay, Durban boy.
Yeah,
okay.
In KZN.
Yes.
And I went to school there.
Okay.
And I came up to Johannesburg to go to university and never left.
And never left. What was life like in Durban back then? What school did you go to?
I went to a school called Carmel College.
Okay.
A Jewish school. You might think I'm a journalist, but what I really am is a failed surfer.
A failed surfer, really?
Because my best friend was a very good surfer.
Okay.
And we used to go to the beach every afternoon and try and surf, and he would be brilliant and I would fail. So my biggest frustration in life is that I could never stand up on a surfboard.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And for a Durban boy, whoa, that was not cool at all.
And it meant all the girls were looking at my friend, not me.
So you turned to reading and books and being interested in stuff like that?
I took refuge in books and newspapers and politics.
Yeah. Would you say you had a relatively happy, calm, innocent childhood?
I did. I came from a solid and excellent, quite liberal, open-minded family. My father was a musician, so there was always music and musicians and a rich diversity of people around us.
Okay.
So yes, I suppose that was a bit unusual, but yes, I had a...
Why do you say that it was a bit unusual at that time to grow up with, all these people around you?
Well, my father was a jazz musician.
Oh, nice.
And, so that meant I grew up in a pretty non-racial house. There were always musicians around of every size, color, creed.
Yes.
I can remember being taken off on sort of Saturday afternoons to sit in clubs where there were rehearsals, where I would sit with my book in the corner.
Oh, nice.
So that sort of thing, yes.
So the jazz thing didn't bite at all for you, no?
Well, if you ask me if I could choose what I really wanted to be, other than a surfer, it would be a jazz musician. But I've tried. I have no talent. I have no ear.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay,
yes.
So you went through school. You had a very interesting, laid-back life in Durban. Protected by your family, you decide to go to Johannesburg.
I came to Johannesburg to come to university.
Okay, specifically to study journalism at the time?
No, I didn't study journalism.
Okay.
I did a BA, a general BA, politics and English, because those were my real interests, writing and politics, and got engaged in student politics at the time. That was in the late 70s. In fact, my first year in university was 1976, so it was an extraordinary year. a very active year when I became involved and active to some extent in NUSAS, the student movement of the time. And I guess that's where I learned a lot of my politics.
Why were you interested in politics at such a young age, and especially in 70s South Africa?
Because it was 70s South Africa. I mean, either it was difficult not to be...
But most people were trying very hard to walk around pretending that the things that were going on were not happening. You know, for a young boy to say, no, this is exactly what I want to study.
I just always had it. I always had a fascination and interest and quite a passion about this country and what was happening in this country and the need to engage in that.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to those years at varsity when the 76, and that started to shape you and how you were thinking. Just give us an overview of what was going on there from your perspective and how you got involved.
So certainly at Wits there was a battle really between the left and the right wing on campus. I learned a great deal then about politics, about I suppose a more radical politics. And I suppose began, you know, and that took one into a different world, a different set of friends in Johannesburg. So somehow I took those lessons about activism, politics into journalism. I did know I always wanted to be a journalist or a writer of some sort. So I guess that's been the tug of war throughout my life between being politically interested and active and being a journalist. I mean, those things overlap. But it means, it means I've played out my politics, or I've tried to play out my politics and a sense of activism through my journalist. I view myself, I've always viewed myself as an activist journalist, not somebody who simply reports what he sees and reflects what's out there, as somebody who hopes to be engaged and active and proactive in his journalism.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to focus on your career as a journalist, especially in the hot 80s. After the break, we continue to get up close with Anton Harber. We'll greatly appreciate any suggestions or comments that you have for us. Our email address is upclose@sabc.co.za or our Twitter handle @upclosesabc. See you just now.
This is Media Monitor, a show that monitors and evaluates some of your major stories from throughout the week, as well as on your Sunday newspaper headlines. Join me every Sunday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. with repeat broadcasts every Monday at 2 a.m. right here on DSTV 404.
Hello, Africa, and welcome to this week's episode of Kaleidoscope. We'll be sampling the creme de la creme of entertainment, arts and culture, lifestyle, and travel. So stay tuned as we bring you the beauty, sights, and sounds of Africa.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays 5:30 p.m. on SABC News, Channel 404.
Thank you for staying with us as we continue to get up close with Anton Harber. Let's go to now, you go to university, you're now very politicized, but you want to write about this, you want to contribute in that way. Take us to how the industry was then and how you got into it.
The industry was closed then because of censorship, because of apartheid. I worked for a small country newspaper, the Springs Advertiser.
Okay.
And then I got a job on what was then the Post and the Sunday Post, the predecessor of the Sowetan, which was a difficult and complex place. And there was a strike there when I'd been there only a short while.
Okay,
what
was the
bitter,
strike
horrible
about?
strike. A fight with management over discrimination and racism and bad treatment, and I took part in that strike.
What was going on exactly? What were they fighting about? What was this discrimination?
Essentially, it was a black paper that was given a raw deal by its owners, then the Argus Company. And the strike was led by great icons like Zulaki Sisulu and Joe Tlulwe and Tammy Mazwai. And so for me, it was kind of learning a lot about the black consciousness. Oddly enough, as a white person working in a black newspaper, taking part in the strike, engaging in an awkward way with a black consciousness organization then. I then went to the Rand Daily Mail, which was the leading liberal newspaper of the time. And I was there the last few years, and when it closed, and that was a terrible tragedy, a bad mistake, very damaging, hurtful thing.
Why did it close down, Professor?
It was losing money, but it was essentially a political decision. It was essentially the owners, it was a liability for the owners who were backing the sort of reformist move at the time. And the Rand Daily Mail was a critical liberal newspaper, and they were not comfortable with it and prepared to carry the losses. And then they closed the newspaper.
So now what? What happens to your career?
So we thought, oh my gosh, my big crisis was how do I stay in journalism?
Yes.
I was unemployed and unemployable.
Because you've been working for the wrong guys.
And one of my colleagues, Owen Manoyam, came to me and said, well, shouldn't we start a newspaper? And we were young and we were foolish and we were idealistic.
Yes.
And we were unemployed, so
the
we
right,
said, okay.
Yeah, the right ingredients right there.
So we said, well, in fact, there's a gap now because the Rand Daily Mail's closed. So let's put together our retrenchment money and start a newspaper. We didn't know what we were doing. We had no money. But somehow we had a sort of spirit and a drive. And there was a real need at the time for a new critical voice, we thought. And it turned out, I think, to be correct.
What were those days like, though? Because, I mean, I don't think it would have been that easy.
Terribly difficult.
You must have had a lot of problem with the authorities, with the police, etc. What was those days like?
Terribly difficult. You used to have to work with lawyers all the time to try and work out what you can or cannot do. And our attitude was to push the boundaries of censorship, to do things that they didn't want us to do.
Yes.
So we had a kind of aggressive attitude towards censorship. So it meant that we were being prosecuted, raided, threatened. Some of our journalists were detained and held for long periods of time. They closed our newspaper for a month. A few times they just confiscated it off the streets and didn't let us distribute it. And you know, we had very little money. So it was literally from week to week. Can we pay the printer this week? Can we get out this week? Can we avoid getting shut down? So it was incredibly pressure, difficult work for years.
But what was driving you guys? Why were you so determined that, I mean, that's almost being rebellious to the system. What was driving you?
It was completely rebellious, and it was in line with the rebellion of the 1980s. You know, it was in line with the rise of the UDF and that rebellion, that township rebellion of the 1980s.
Yeah, and a bit of the surfer guy in you there.
I mean, I suppose what happened was we absolutely saw a need for a certain kind of journalism and a certain attitude towards censorship that pushed the boundaries. But the fact is that there was an audience that grabbed it and took it on board and supported it, gave it money, and it grew from there. Ironically, the state of emergency at the time was what gave us our toughest time, but also our life, because we said, we're taking this on.
Okay.
They don't want us to cover security force action or what the ANC was saying in exile. They were trying to shut down the UDF, and we said, we're covering that. And it was difficult and it was risky. but we managed to stay alive through the process.
I'm interested in you sharing just one of the stories. I mean, having to communicate with the ANC in exile while you running away and hiding from authorities. Just share one of the stories that you remember, you know, during that time.
Let me think of a good example. I mean, there was one extraordinary time when we were hosting a book week around censorship, and we had invited Salman Rushdie.
Okay.
And the fatwa to kill Salman Rushdie was issued at that very time. So we had the Muslim community meeting in our office, furious and arguing with us. And on that day, while I'm in that meeting, I'm called out, and they've issued an order closing our newspaper for a month.
Okay.
And then we had to say, what do we do? How do we survive the month? Which I'm pleased to say, because it was a month, we managed to do. But we, you know, it was a constant thing of working with lawyers to say, can we push the law a bit further? They say you can't have a picture of Nelson Mandela. What if we have a drawing of Nelson Mandela?
Okay.
And I'm talking about the alternative papers as a whole.
Yes,
there were
yes.
6 or 8 of them at the time. They say we can't report security force action. What if we report this action without saying they're security forces?
Okay.
So we would say some men in uniform went and did these terrible things in the township.
And
Everyone would know what we
who
were
could
saying.
that be? Yes, exactly.
And see if they would let us do it. But we spent a lot of time in court.
Okay.
Defending ourselves, defending the newspaper.
And then what's happening in the other side of your life during that time? I mean, are you starting to have a family? What is your parents? What are they saying? Because you're living a dangerous life.
I must say my parents were extremely nervous and worried, but
Yeah.
never unsupportive. I was fortunate in that I had got married and had a wife who was completely supportive, and who never said, don't do this, or don't be, when we were being foolish, never said, don't be foolish. Children came a little bit later, towards the end of that period. But obviously it was quite hard, it would have been quite hard to have a family in that
certainly.
uncertain situation.
We're going to take another break, and then when we come back, I just want to wrap this up. Just contrast what the industry was like then, specifically, you know, that drive that journalists have, and looking at the industry now. And we also want to know what you do outside of, you know, the work that you do.
Sure.
We're going to continue to get up close with Anton Harber. Suggestions, comments, please share them with us. Our email address is upclose@sabc.co.za, and our Twitter handle @upclosesabc. See you just now.
SABC News plays a critical role in providing unbiased and reliable news. We have a well-established reputation of uncovering, reporting and delivering news. A significant growth in popularity of our news demonstrates the demand for our news content. We continue to provide unrivaled coverage of vital events in and out of the country. Wherever the news is happening, we'll be there to bring them to you at the right time. No one has the news covered like SABC News. We lead and they follow. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
What time is it? It's question time.
Sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind, punishing them for their own future, because if they don't correct these things, it's going to be a time bomb down the line.
That's question time with me, Mpotsedu, Monday to Saturday, 5:30 p.m. on SABC News. What time is it? It's question time.
I do not trust your criticism, because after all, you don't like the members of this committee. Why should we believe that you're going to like anything that they come up with?
We can't trust the Professor Njabule Ndebele, who was the Vice Chancellor of Cape Town. Bani Pichan was the Vice Chancellor of UNISA.
That's question time with me, Mpotsedu, Monday to Saturday, 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Thank you for staying with us as we wrap up our conversation with Professor Anton Harber. Professor, just contrast the industry back then in the 80s and the industry now. What would you say about the state of journalism?
We were driven then by politics, by passion. We took risks. We certainly weren't driven by money because we were losing money all the time, and we only existed through the generous support of all sorts of supporters and backers. Nowadays, there's much more focus on financial survival, much less political risk. So it's very different. There isn't both the threat and the excitement of that time. But I must say, I often wish we saw a more aggressive journalism.
You really feel that we're not that aggressive right now?
I think there is some.
Okay.
I think that we have a lot of good investigative journalism. But it tends to be quite narrow. It tends to be a certain kind of story. And I wish we would see much more, much wider. I wish we saw a wider range of coverage and opinions. I think our news media now is focused in the center of our politics. There isn't that much. Ironically, in those days there was a left-wing press, there was a right-wing press, and nowadays we're all in the middle. So you may even say there's less diversity now than there was then.
Do you think we'll see a rise of another alternative voice coming up in the next couple of years in South Africa specifically?
I hope so, because one always wants new voices, one always wants fresh voices, and one always wants more diversity. And if you look at the history of South African journalism, then a lot of the best stuff has come from new alternative voices, some of whom have moved into the mainstream, but some of the richest journalism has come from there.
And now, you're in a position where you get to teach and influence journalists who are, growing up in the industry. What would you say you hope to be the state of journalism in the future in South Africa as we go forward?
I hope that we're pushing out journalists who are not just interested in jobs and careers and money, but have a passion.
Because there still isn't much money in journalism.
People don't do it for money, but a passion for the news, the story, for understanding and explaining what's happening in this country. Mostly what we try and cultivate is a critical, independent spirit. And that ability to don't take things at face value, to probe deeper, and to form your own thinking and your own understanding of what's going on in this country.
Professor Harber, what do you do outside of being Professor Harber? Who's Anton now? We know who Anton was when he was younger. He was rebellious, he wanted to surf, he loved jazz music. Who are you now?
Well, I suppose I'm much more of a family man now. I still love jazz.
Yes.
So for me, an ideal evening is a good book and some great traditional jazz.
Such as?
Johnny Hodges, Stan Getz.
Yes.
That era very much. I mean, I listen to more contemporary stuff as well, but that era is what really gets me going. I go hiking once a year.
Oh, that's nice.
With my friends to see the bits of the country in a different way.
Okay, so you go to different places?
A few weeks ago, we went for a 5-day walk along the Wild Coast beaches.
Oh, nice.
And coastline, which was just wonderful and beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I play chess.
Okay.
I've always loved chess. I used to play a kind of club chess. Now it's really just social chess.
Okay.
But it's a game I've always loved.
And in terms of travels, your favorite places to travel to? Outside the country.
Look, I love travel. I love to go almost everywhere.
Yes.
I've spent time in Italy, which I've loved a great deal. Spent a lot of time in Mozambique because I love those beaches and that coastline and that food. So take me anywhere new and different, and I love it and I'm excited, and to be there with my family, best thing.
Nothing in the US, Europe?
I've spent time in New York. I've traveled quite a lot.
Yes.
Quite a lot for work. I was in Rio for a conference last week, and it was the first time I was there. Brazil is so interesting for South Africans because there's so much in common with us and yet so different. That was completely interesting for me. And then there's my own writing.
Yes, of course, that you continue to do. Your blog, you still contribute weekly to one of the publications, etc.
Yes,
But I guess my last question for you would be, what's next? What's next for you? You know, we didn't spend much time talking about what you really went through as a journalist back then, you know. Your life has quietened down. You're just dealing with crazy journalism students. But what's next?
No, look, I love the teaching. I love the engagement with young people. But what I wrote my book Deep Slurt 2 years ago. And so now I'm looking to write longer, more researched, more in-depth pieces of that sort. And so if I could give up everything and just do that would be number one choice, but one doesn't earn a living from writing books in this country.
Certainly doesn't. But we're grateful that you still do it, and thank you for making the time to chat to us.
Thank you.
Oh, well, that's how we're going to wrap up today's edition of Up Close. You can catch us same time weekdays on SABC News, DSTV channel 404. Catch some of our favorite episodes on the website. That's youtube.com/SABC News. And my Twitter handle @Tsepi Motsekua. Or you can drop us an email, upclose@sabc.co.za. Till next time, bye-bye.
Hello, Africa, and welcome to this week's episode of Kaleidoscope. We'll be sampling the creme de la creme of entertainment, arts and culture, lifestyle, and travel. So stay tuned as we bring you the beauty, sights, and sounds of Africa.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays 5:30 p.m. on SABC News, channel 404.
Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, the show that explores your legal rights and recourse to those violated. I'm your host, Dumila Matez.
Will the ban on alcohol, or the marketing of alcoholic beverages, include things like sorghum beer, homemade beer, and those kind of things?
I think what is must be clear is that we are not banning the industry, not at all. We are controlling the industry.
As I'm sitting here, I'm actually agreeing with the minister violently.
Advertisement says to young people, it's cool to drink. Drinking is associated with success. Drinking is associated with celebrities.
We cannot afford to have adverts on television that glorifies alcohol.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
It's exactly 1500 hours Central African time, and you're watching PM News, where the next hour is completely dedicated to bringing you the latest news, business and sport headlines from in and around the world. I'm Alicia Jali. With me is the team, of course. Colin is back and loves doing business with you. And of course, Kirat mans the sport desk. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. Colin, what's happening in business? We know you love doing business with us.
Yes, we're looking at the optimism that is in the mining industry. As you know, that gold and platinum industries suffered quite very badly last year during to industrial action. But right now there has been an upsurge slightly, and we'll be looking at those details. But also Oxford Business Group is having a working collaboration with Business Unit South Africa so that they can produce data that can make people be confident and read on what is it that they'll be working on when they come to invest in South Africa.
Thank you.
So you need to know where you put your money.
Clearly he's been on a business holiday, wouldn't you say, Kirat? What's happening in sport?
Well, Alicia, the Bafana squad has been selected for that friendly against Spain on November 19th. Now, a lot of under-23 players selected and 9 players from overseas as well.
Thank you so much. While the gentlemen will be back with full details of those and other stories in business and sport as we proceed with the bulletin. Time now to take a look at your news making headlines this hour. In our top story, the fight against e-tolling in Gauteng is not yet over as the DA files an argument High Court application. Judge John Murphy says that Thandi Maqubela's suspicious conduct around the time of her husband's death points to an unnatural cause of death. And in sport, Mamelodi Sundowns back at the top of the Absa Premier League table after a hard-fought victory over Free State Stars. A very good afternoon. You're watching PM News. In our top story, the DA has filed an urgent application in the Western Cape High Court challenging the way the bill will facilitate the implementation of the e-tolls was passed in Parliament. If successful, this could delay the final implementation of the toll systems. Now, the Freedom Front Plus also plans to launch another court application in the North Gauteng High Court next week to have the e-toll Act declared unconstitutional.
Last month, the Supreme Court of Appeal dismissed an appeal by the opposition to Urban Tolling Alliance in its e-toll challenge against SANRAL. OUTA opted out of further appeals against e-tolling, citing financial challenges. The fight has now been taken over by the opposition parties. DA's candidate for Gauteng, Musi Maimane, said papers were served on Wednesday on President Jacob Zuma, the Speaker of National Assembly, and the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, the Minister of Transport, and SANRAL. The government aims to implement e-tolling by next month.
If the DA wins this High Court appeal, the matter will then automatically be referred to the Constitutional Court, where e-tolling bill may in fact be declared unconstitutional. We are of the view that e-tolling, the bill, was incorrectly passed through Parliament and was signed into law by President Jacob Zuma. The Constitution makes a distinction between bills that impact national government only and the bills that will impact not only just the national government but the provincial governments as well.
The Freedom Front Plus legal challenge would claim that the Act is unconstitutional on the basis that it has been incorrectly classified by Parliament. Their court battle will be joined by the Transvaal Agriculture Union and the National Taxpayers Association.
Judge John Murphy has pointed out that Thandi Maqubela's suspicious conduct around the time of her husband's death points to an unnatural cause of death, passing judgment